Hello, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well today. So, our goal for today is to talk about objections to utilitarianism, right? So, as we learned earlier, an objection is something that shows that something else is false. So, what we're going to be doing in this class is looking at what are called problem cases for utilitarianism or consequentialism generally. So, for instance, utilitarianism and consequentialism, they tell us what is right and wrong in any circumstance. And what we find out is that there are some circumstances where they seem to give us the wrong answer. And that seems to be a problem with the theory, right? So you read in Bernard Williams two potential problem cases with utilitarianism. We're going to be talking about two additional ones today as well. So first, we're going to go over one of the cases that was not in Williams. So suppose that there's a person who's like a superhero or like a supervillain, and this person is capable of experiencing more pleasure than everyone else in the whole world combined. So suppose that so long as this guy is like really happy, everybody else can be a miserable slave. And so what's happening is that this person has so much pleasure that it outweighs everybody else's suffering. And so in this case, right, if this were to happen, consequentialism and potential utilitarianism as well would demand that we just keep the pleasure monster happy instead of, say, freeing everybody that's a slave. So suppose that it would make him sad to have no slaves. His displeasure would outweigh everybody's pleasure of being freed. So we're like, our responsibilities, according to this case, would be just to this one guy, because this one guy is capable of experiencing so much more pleasure than all of the rest of us combined, right? So we have to ask ourselves, this is a far-fetched scenario, but if it were to be the case, it seems like consequentialism gives us the wrong verdict. It seems like the right thing to do would be to free everybody else and not just try to please this one dude, right? So it seems like intuitively, consequentialism gives us the wrong answer in this case. Let's talk about a second case that was also not in the Williams text. So this is the angry mob case. So let's suppose that you are the sheriff of a small town and a young drifter is passing through, and he's accused of stealing the town bell. It's the most valuable item to everybody in the community. So he's being chased by an angry mob of people, and he comes to you for protection. You know that he did not steal the bell. Let's just stipulate that. And after talking to him, the mob demands that you give up the young drifter to the mob. And you know that they're probably going to kill him. Okay. So if you hand him over, the angry mob's going to kill him. And you also know that they won't believe you if you say that he's innocent of stealing the bell. So let's suppose that you are a utilitarian. And so as the utilitarian sheriff, you know that it will make everyone in town really, really happy if they kill the young drifter. And their total happiness will outweigh the young drifter's pain of being killed. So what should you do in this case? And it seems like utilitarianism says that we have to give an innocent person over to an angry mob to be killed. And that seems like a big problem, right? So long as the mob's pleasure of killing the innocent person outweighs the suffering of that one person's death, right? Utilitarianism is going to say that we have to give this person over to be killed. And that seems to be a very problematic situation, right? So we could also think of, say, a serial killer, right? And everybody believes that this person did it, but there's not sufficient proof to show that they did it. And we could just also stipulate that, in fact, they didn't do it, right? It seems utilitarianism might suggest that we ought to say, kill this person in order to make everybody else happy, right? And so punishing the innocent seems to be, in certain scenarios, a thing that utilitarianism will point us to. And generally speaking, punishing the innocent seems really bad, right? So it seems like in this case and in other analogous cases, utilitarianism gives us the wrong verdict. All right, so that's the second case. The next case is from the text. So I'm just going to read this, and then we can talk about it. So George, who has just taken his PhD in chemistry, finds it extremely difficult to get a job. He is not very robust in health, which cuts down the number of jobs he might be able to do satisfactorily. His wife has to go out to work to keep them, which itself causes a great deal of strain since they have small children and there are severe problems about looking after them. The result of all this, especially on the children, are damaging. An older chemist who knows about this situation says that he can get George a decently paying job in a certain laboratory, which pursues research into chemical and biological warfare. George says that he cannot accept this since he is opposed to chemical and biological warfare. The older man replies that he is not too keen on it himself. Come to that, but after all, George's refusal is not going to make the job or the laboratory go away. What is more, the older chemist happens to know that if George refuses the job, it will certainly go to a contemporary of George's who is not inhibited by any such scruples and is likely, if appointed, to push along research with greater zeal than George would. Indeed, it is not merely concern for George and his family, but, to speak frankly and in confidence, some alarm about this other man's excess of zeal, which has led the older man to offer to use his influence to get George the job. George's wife, to whom he is deeply attached, has views, and the details of which need not concern us, from which it follows that at least there is nothing particularly wrong with research into CBW. What should George do? Okay, so the idea here is that George has a conviction. He is against chemical and biological warfare, right? And he is conflicted because it seems to be the case that he's going to bring about better outcomes by accepting the job, right? So it seems like to increase overall total well-being and welfare, George has to go against his convictions and work for the chemical plant, right? So it seems to be the case that utilitarianism demands that George take the job at the chemical weapons plant, even though it undermines his conviction that chemical weapons are objectionable. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what do you mean by commitment, Bernard Williams? By commitment, Williams means projects and attitudes with which one is deeply and extensively committed, right? So if I have a conviction or a commitment, say, that it is morally wrong, say, to maybe have an abortion, I would have an objection to, say, working in an abortion clinic, right? And many people have that sort of commitment. So if biological weapons aren't your thing, you can imagine, say, working in an abortion clinic or working for, say, a charity or nonprofit organization with which you very much disagree, right? So you can sort of put yourself in George's shoes, right? You can change up the case to feel conflicted like George does. And so Um, so it seems like morality demands that we set aside our commitments, at least according to Williams. So, and Williams wants to say that this undermines integrity in a very problematic way. So, integrity means that we do things that are in accordance with our commitments, right? So we hold certain values, right? We have certain moral standards by which we live, right? And in order to have integrity, it means to follow through with those commitments in one's own actions. And so George can't take this job without undermining his own integrity. And that seems like a real problem. So utilitarianism demands that George go against his commitments and take the job at the factory. And any moral theory, and this is what Williams wants to push, any moral theory that undermines our genuine commitments is faulty, right? So I say genuine commitments here to distinguish from, say, bad commitments, right? So if I'm committed to torturing animals and that's a value that I hold, right? That seems like a disingenuous commitment, right? So when we have commitments that are themselves good, we should act with integrity. Whereas if I hold a value that, say, I want to say torture animals, if in order to act with integrity, I would have to actually torture animals, and that seems like a problem, right? So we have to say that we have to distinguish between genuine commitments and disingenuous commitments, right? And it seems like George's commitment is genuine. So in short, utilitarianism attacks George's integrity, and that's a big problem with utilitarianism, according to Williams. So we may ask ourselves, how could the utilitarian respond, right? Could the utilitarian say that, okay, we only need to optimize outcomes if those, in doing so, we don't undermine our own integrity, right? And we can always ask, like, then why should we care about integrity? So it seems like we have two values, well-being and integrity, right? But if all values are just reducible to pain and pleasure and well-being, like Mill says, well, then integrity is a value that can also be reduced to pleasure and pain as well, right? So the utilitarian is going to have a hard time reconciling with this case, right? Now, the utilitarian may also say that, look, it doesn't matter if we undermine integrity. Integrity doesn't matter in and of itself. Rather, it's a means to, say, pleasure, living a more pleasurable life, right? And we may be suspicious of this response. But anyway, so it's something, so if you were thinking that consequentialism and utilitarianism is, or are plausible moral theories, this case will push against that idea. Thank you all.